Well, hello again, everybody. As this quarantine goes on, and we can't really see an end yet, perhaps like myself, you are thinking a little bit more to the past, looking to our forefathers to see how they figured out how to do things, maybe with fewer supplies, less access to things. Maybe you need to be stretching your meals to go a little bit further. So I thought it would be fun to do a meal or two meals in one video for the price of one inexpensive meat purchase. Like the Indians of old, we're going to be working here with every part of the buffalo, except we'll be using chicken. And the second part of this recipe will incorporate a little bit of what I showed you in my video on making a roux for a basic gravy. So the first recipe is not even really a recipe, it's just baked chicken. Believe it or not, it's one of my most popular recipes at church. Every time I make it, people ask what my secret is, what is my special seasoning blend, what's my fancy technique. I don't have any of that for you. It's salt and pepper on chicken, but the only key to it is to use dark meat. Dark meat, as you probably know, is where all the flavor is. And if I buy dark meat, I buy a thigh. It has a nice amount of meat on it. And it's always bone in and always skin on. I feel like Americans have deboned and deskinned as many things as possible for convenience sake, but we have lost the ability for the meat to stay moist and tender under high temperature. So I think a lot of people are surprised at just how good a simple piece of chicken can be. So for this, I buy a fairly large package of chicken thigh. This is about $5 or $6. I have a big family, and this is a package of 10, which will give us, 3 or 4 left over by the end of the meal, which we're going to want for our next recipe. So all I do with this couldn't really be easier. You just open it up, you have your thigh. Sometimes there's a little bit of excess skin on the bottom of it. You'll see this is a little frozen still. That's a lot of skin. So I will just take a pair of shears and trim that off, but you do want to leave the rest of the skin on there. All right, so then we're just going to salt and pepper it. I usually use kosher salt, just a good sprinkling on top, and a good grind of pepper. And that's going to go in the oven at 425 degrees for about half an hour. You want the skin to get really nice, golden, crispy. You want a lot of the fat to render out into the bottom of your pan as well. So keep an eye on it. It's pretty hard to overbake chicken thigh just because it's so tender and dark. But that's all we're going to do for right now. See you in a few minutes. Okay, so this chicken has been roasting away at 425 degrees for about a half an hour. It was sizzling and bubbling, and the skin is nice and crispy, nice and golden brown, and you have all of this good dripping that has rendered out. So for dinner tonight, you can serve chicken thigh over steamed rice, over mashed potatoes, over grits. We have done all of them. I don't really make a special sauce. We usually just use some homemade ranch, some barbecue sauce, some honey mustard. All those things are really good with some steamed vegetables. And that's meal number 1. At the end of the meal, you're going to prepare for tomorrow's meal. Hopefully you have 3 or 4 thighs set aside or are left over. You're going to strip all of the meat off of those and put it in a Tupperware. You're going to take those bones. Don't throw the bones away unless you really don't have time. It is really worth the time to make your own broth. Homemade broth is so good. It's so good for you. It's full of wonderful vitamins and lots of things that we need right now, especially. And every good cook should have a stock on hand, of homemade chicken stock. So I make a big pot of this. I just throw the bones in, cover it with water in a pot, turn it on to boil. I add maybe an onion, if I have some celery, garlic, to give it a little bit of extra flavor. I just let that boil for 3 or 4 hours. You can use your Instant Pot. It has a wonderful broth feature that takes about half an hour. So once that is done, you strain out your bones and store it. I usually keep it in just two cup containers in my freezer or fridge. Pull them out when I'm making a soup or a curry or a pot pie, which is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And you're not going to throw away this dripping. You want all of this good fat. That's going to be your base for your gravy for a pot pie. So I just pour it straight into a Pyrex so I know how much I will have to work with. I just pour as much of it out as I can. And I'm going to store this in my fridge. You'll see here that it's already separated out. This is a broth on the bottom, and this is the fat that floats to the top. This is going to harden up in the fridge, and it's going to look a lot like butter when it's done. And that's what you're going to use as the base for your gravy. So this is really good stuff. Don't toss it. All right. So in your fridge, you should have shredded chicken meat, dripping, and a pot of broth on the stove. Of course, you can buy broth, but I highly recommend at least trying once making your own broth for use at home. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Hello again. We are going to go ahead and do our second meal from our single chicken purchase. This is a homemade, from scratch, delicious comfort food chicken pot pie. We could all use a little comfort food right now, right? So if you kept everything from your baked chicken meal, this will come together quite easily. Besides your gravy fixings, I have my dripping here, and I have some of my homemade chicken broth, or you can purchase chicken broth as well. I have my shredded chicken. This was from 3 chicken thighs. I have a bag of frozen mixed vegetables. Nice and easy. And either a bag of frozen diced potatoes. I couldn't find any. These are 3 Yukon Gold potatoes, diced pretty small so they can cook all the way through in the time allotted. I like Yukon Golds because they have a nice thin tasty skin and I don't have to peel them. I do not like peeling potatoes. Okay. If you like mushrooms, you can add mushrooms in here if you want to saute some onion. I keep it simple because my kids prefer it simple. Okay. So I'm not giving exact amounts here for all of the filling. It depends on how much chicken you had, how many drippings were left over, which will affect the amount of gravy you can make. And then the gravy ratio to meat and vegetables is kind of up to you. So if you have a big family, I'm going to use the whole bag of veggies. You may only want half. Or you can make a big batch, and this is an excellent freezer meal. It keeps great in the freezer. Throw it in a 9x13 aluminum pan and save it for later or give it to your neighbor. Anyway, it's a very versatile meal. There are several ways to top a good pot pie. Of course, traditionally, just want a crust. I do both a crust and a biscuit topping for our church meals, depending on what I'm in the mood for. Crust is a little more complicated. So tonight I'm going to do my drop biscuit, which is just a biscuit. It's a slightly wetter biscuit dough. You just drop it on the top instead of rolling it out and cutting it. It's very easy. Of course, you can purchase a pie crust or even a canned biscuit, but I feel like it's worth the extra 5 minutes to make something from scratch. It's just really yummy. All right, so we're going to get started with a 400-degree oven. Go ahead and preheat that. I have a big pan here. This is an oven-safe Dutch oven. You can use a skillet that's oven-safe. I like to use all of this in one, so then I just throw this straight into the oven, and I don't have to have extra dishes. You can put it in a 9x13 if you want to after you've cooked it, but it's simpler this way. I'm all about simpler. Okay, you'll see here the fat has floated to the top and solidified. This is more stock underneath. I have half a cup of chicken fat here. I'm going to just put it right here in my pan and let it melt like we had in our gravy video. That's going to melt quickly. If you have a little more, a little less, that's fine. Just remember to keep your flour ratio the same. So I have half a cup of all-purpose flour here. I'm going to whisk that together. And we're going to let it get brown, because brown is going to develop a really good flavor and get rid of that raw flour taste. Okay, and it's all whisked. Now, in a minute here, I've got, this is 3 cups of my homemade chicken stock. You can add a little more, a little less. You can add more later as well, as if you find out you didn't have enough gravy. I'm going to go ahead and throw this too. This is good stuff. Just straight in there once that has browned. I also like to use a little bit of cream in my gravy, or milk, something to give it a little bit of a creamier flavor. Certainly not necessary, but it really kind of puts this recipe over the top. It's really delicious. I also like to add pepper, of course, a good amount of salt, because those potatoes are going to absorb a lot of the salt. So you want to be generous with your salt. And I add thyme. I prefer fresh. Dried is great. If you have it, you can add oregano, you can add basil, or no herbs. This is definitely my favorite, just some dried thyme in a bottle. Okay. As this browns, we're going to go ahead and make our biscuit. Okay, this is 2 cups of all-purpose flour. To that, we will add 1 tablespoon of baking powder, not soda, just powder. Throw it in there with a tablespoon of sugar, just to sweeten things up just a little bit. And a hefty pinch of salt. That's that. All we need to add to that is 1 stick of melted butter. This is just unsalted butter. And added to that, I want a cup of buttermilk. You can add regular milk if you want, but I highly recommend investing, it's not expensive, purchasing buttermilk. That's one of my secrets to good baking, is just add buttermilk when you can. It adds a really great flavor. It makes things more tender and more a little bit moister. So this is 1 cup of buttermilk. And that's it for your biscuit. Just pour that in there. Super easy. And stir it together just until it is all the flour is incorporated. You don't need to beat this to death. Okay. This biscuit does not have to be put on top of gravy in a pot pie. This is a perfectly good biscuit recipe. You just drop it by spoonfuls onto a greased baking sheet, and you have a really simple side bread for any other meal that you want to make. Okay, so that is done. Let's see here. It's nice and wet. You wouldn't want to roll this out. It would be a sticky mess. Okay, I'm going to set that aside. You can smell my flour getting nice and brown here. Stir that up. Hot. Okay, you see it's, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's nice and brown now. You can smell it has a nice toasty flavor. So here comes the broth. Remember, this is going to kind of seize up and thicken really fast, so you just keep whisking. And it will come back together, even if it looks lumpy and weird at first. All right. I'm going to add the rest of this. Slide that in there. All right. Stir that till it's smooth. Now this might look a little bit thin, but again, it will thicken up as it bakes, as those biscuits absorb a lot of the moisture, and the potatoes will also absorb that. Here's about a cup. Again, I don't really measure, about a cup of cream. And we're going to let that come to a good simmer. I'll be right back. Okay, our gravy is simmering and bubbling and is thickened up really nicely. So now we're just going to add the potatoes gently. Don't splash yourself. Our chicken. Already smells so good. And our vegetables. Okay. So that's going to put this at about 3/4 full, but there'll be room for the biscuit on top. Stir it all together. Taste your gravy. Oh, more salt. More pepper. And a little bit of thyme. Okay, this is looking very thick. And once you put that biscuit on there, it will be pretty dry. So I'm going to go ahead and add more cream. Why not? So just adjust it as you see necessary. I trust you. All right, so that is ready to go. We're going to put our biscuit topping just by spoonfuls. I use my little cookie scoop. You can use just a regular spoon, just small amounts because these are going to about double in size. I'm just going to kind of plop them all over the top here, and they will sink, not all the way, but that's okay. They're going to rise. The baking powder will help them rise to the occasion. So we're just going to cover the whole top of our pot pie. I usually get about 15 little biscuits, which is enough for 2 each in our family. And then again, the oven is at 400 degrees. This is going to take about ½ an hour to bake. And you'll know it's done because the gravy is hot and bubbling. Sorry, my phone's dinging. And the biscuits will have risen, doubled, and they'll be beautifully golden on the top. And they will smell amazing. Okay, so that is our pot pie. Ready to go in the oven. I don't know how well you guys can see this. Kind of like a chicken and dumpling. Not terribly pretty right now, but it will be. See you in ½ an hour. Okay, our chicken pot pie is just out of the oven. It took about 25 minutes this time. It was getting so nice and golden brown on the top, so I pulled it on out. Wanted to give you a quick shot of it here before it gets too dark in my kitchen. So that's our finished product, and I've got 5 hungry kids here who are ready to dive in. That is 2 meals for the price of 1 meat purchase, and I'd like to do more videos like this if you're interested. If there's anything else that I've made in the past, maybe that you would be interested in making or hearing about, let me know in the comments or on Facebook, and I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy. Bye.